Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's vBrownBag. I'm your host, Tom Green, and tonight we're going to be discussing custom forms in vRealize Automation 7.4. Before we get started with that, a little bit of housekeeping. You can follow the conversation online. Tweet hashtag vBrownBag, and I'll be watching the stream to interrupt with questions or snide comments. Those are preferred. They're always fun. We are also tweeting out of vBrownBag handles from all around the world. So we are a worldwide podcast. We have shows at different times in different time zones. If you want to check out the schedule for upcoming events, go to vbrownbag.com/brownbags. And I personally guarantee that it is up to date as of the time of this recording, because I did that right before we started. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the vRealize automation, and to do that, we have experts on the line. Cody De Arkland.
Something like that.
Well, we have the expert Jad El-Zein, and also joining him, Cody De Arkland. So, Jad and Cody, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon. I'm in lovely Sydney today, so thanks for having me. So it is morning for me still. Jad El-Zein, I'm in VMware's Cloud Management Office as CTO, which is just 2 weeks into that funny role, and go by Virtual Jad. And today we're going to talk about some of the new VRA 7.4 features, specifically some of the noise we've done around custom forms. Cody and I have been hitting Twitter with some of that excitement. So we'll get into that in a bit. Cody?
So Cody De Arkland, I've done a few vBrownBags now. I'm a systems engineer out of the West Coast. So I'm in California, so a little bit further away from Jad. Jad, have you fought a koala yet?
I have not seen a koala. I haven't been punched by a kangaroo, and I haven't eaten either. And I haven't been killed by insects the size of my head. So far, so good.
Batting 1,000. Batting 1,000.
Don't worry, there's always time.
Yeah,
for all that.
There is.
All right.
All right. So
your PowerPoint.
All right. So I promise there's going to be 3 slides total, just as an introduction. This being a new feature, a new capability, something that's been a long time coming actually, for vRealize Automation 7.4. I wanted to do just a little bit of intro. This session, Cody and I are going to cover some of the fundamentals of custom forms and why it even matters. A lot of you have had some experience with this already, or have done it in beta or some other means. But most of you have probably tried to accomplish custom forms by using XAS, and we'll get into all of that. Some more advanced topics next week, same time, same place. But today we're going to primarily just show you some of the fundamentals. Because I'm, I gotta represent here some of the themes that are tied to this release. And the latest release of 7.4, if you haven't seen it yet, has been just making the whole solution easier to consume, faster to get started. There's a lot of bits and pieces to that. But for custom forms specifically, this has been a big UX effort to really start making VRA a little prettier to consume, specifically to consume. There's a lot happening underneath the covers here, and tons of stuff this year. Between now and VMworld, you're going to see some pretty awesome releases and capabilities and updates to the entire platform from a UI moving on in. But in bringing Clarity, our UI standard, into VRA as we know it today, it's not a replace UI and rebuild in Clarity, right? It's not that easy for this multi-component beast that VRA is. So we've been easing it in. You've seen it in container management. You've seen it in a little bit in VRO, but in some of the other products, you've probably already seen it as well. VRA is a little bit behind on the scene. But for this release, the greatest consumption of, or adoption of Clarity has been in what's called a new custom forms designer. And the custom forms designer is actually very well named because it is exactly what it sounds like. Now, I've used this analogy a lot in the past, and I have gotten beaten up for it because of comparing technology like this to what I'm about to do, which is, if any of you have used Front Page 15 years ago to build your first website in a UI, this is, I'm not going to say a lot like this, but the feeling of being able to drag and drop forms and create inputs and relationships and images and all that stuff, and all of a sudden you have this little web page. I mean, that's pretty significant. It was significant 15 years ago. And while we are leveraging a whole different set of modern technologies to do this, that's a pretty decent analogy, minus the 15 years old part. So
and minus the fact that front page is front page, right? Like, except for that part.
Awesome, man. Front page was
at
awesome.
the time.
I was like, wow, I could drag and drop and then insert my JavaScript wherever I wanted. It was awesome.
Yeah, Front Page is where I made my first web page, so don't diss that.
Yeah, exactly. And then when AOL started supporting Front Page, that was magical. All right, so so here we are, custom forms designer. This is an answer to a lot of requests, a lot of demands, and even a lot of gaps and limitations. So just a quick history lesson here. vRealize 7.0, our 7x platform, introduced a whole new way of building and creating and designing applications through the Converged Blueprint Designer or the Unified Designer. So we can drag and drop and build these application topologies. But then when you go to consume it, it's back to the same old tiered, very boring .NET backed form. And because of that, even though you put the work in things like the property dictionary and custom properties, and you got creative in building drop downs and doing a lot of backend XML and so on, a dozen different ways to do it, just using the core extensibility functions. Even with all of those things, you're limited to very basic relationship building and drop downs. So what happened also in 7.0 is we introduced what's called XAS Form Designer. And the XAS Form Designer was truly designed to allow you to consume vRealize orchestrator workflows as service items. And honestly, that was probably the most powerful features of 7, but we didn't even know it. What ended up happening is, I used to be out there and saying, with XAS, the sky's the limit. You could literally do and serve up anything through your portal. And then you can actually customize and do all kinds of relationships because all the work happens in VRO, and then you use the forms designer to layer additional policies on top of that. Well, one of the most common use cases for XAS today, 4 versions in or subversions in, is to use XAS to wrap your traditional old boring forms with a prettier wrapper. And while that was not created to do that specific use case specifically, it's an awesome use case, and it met a lot of requirements and helped us fill some of these limitations of the boring blueprint. Okay, so that's a little bit of history lesson. Today, or 2 weeks ago, we introduced vRealize 7.4, and that whole wrapper concept was really one of the drivers behind what we're doing in the custom forms designer, and we couldn't really come up with any fancier name than custom forms designer, but that's really what it is. Don't be fooled by custom. It's not a overly complex extensibility function. It is actually a form designer so that you can drag and drop and build these forms on top of your backend applications, regardless of the platform and application that it is, and be able to deliver and consume your cloud however you want your users to interface with that cloud. So it's very powerful, especially for those who support multi-cloud, multi-platform, different types of applications, including XAS, because now you can make it all look and feel exactly the same. So you can do branding inside of a form, you can do a lot of relationship building, and that's what I'm going to show you real quick in this introduction demo, and then I'm going to hand it off to Cody, where he's going to go into a couple of other different use cases, and then next week we'll dive a whole lot deeper into it. So a couple of the features. easy and rich customizations. That's really what this is all about. It's all done in clarity. It's really pretty. And it's also, just to put it out there, a preview of what the next version of VRA is going to look like once we, once the entire platform starts to use and adopt the Clarity UI across the entire consumer UI. This is really the direction we've been heading, and that's no secret. So it's not I'm not giving anything away there. But with the custom forms, we can control the functions and the relationships and the control types directly inside the form. So you no longer really need to know, actually you no longer at all need to know VRO and build those relationships in VRO, which is what you had to do if you, some of the more advanced relationships, if you used XAS wrappers or XAS forms. VRO and XAS, while 80% coverage occurred between those two, so you can manipulate the UI to have controls. There's other things that you had to go back to VRO to do. And those were limitations, and that's where things get kind of annoyingly complex, unless you really know what you're doing and you can actually build some really cool things. But anyway.
Well, that was, what I saw happen a lot was that people would, there'd be like one or two guys, usually one or girls in a company that had really focused on being, the designer, the guy who was building those blueprints and building the way they looked. But because the skill, there was a skill to it, right? It wasn't as simple as custom forms designer makes it. It made it really hard to do kind of knowledge transfer or have people learn that skill because they were too busy focused on learning other things. And there was a lot of stuff you had to learn to make this stuff dynamic and to kind of square peg round hole these type of like decision driven events within the UI in Orchestrator and then have it translate. So like we've really lowered the skill bar to be able to accomplish really good looking things inside of the interface with Forms Designer versus VRO.
Yep, exactly. And so one of the demos I'm going to show, or the demo I'm going to show live, because Cody and I have a lot of faith in the product as we show it live, is just going from a traditional form and applying a custom form. All right, so again, this is new in VRA 7.4. I didn't want to jump directly into the depth of the product. We're going to do that next week. So while typically these vBrownBags can get quite technical, this is not going to be that quite technical session. Next week I'll be back at home base and we'll be charged up. What I would love to see though is between now and then, as you see this product, say, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? How do you do X, Y, Z? And that'll give us a lot of ammo for next Wednesday, I guess. All right, so just a few more points here on custom forms. Ultimately, it's just about consuming the applications any way you see fit. For a lot of you who've shied away from XAS forms, Cody just actually recently posted an awesome blog post in the VMware blogs on using XAS for a specific use case. So take a look at that. It was posted, I think, last week. But
I'll drop it in the chat.
Yeah, there you go. But just to be clear, this is not introducing something new that makes all your existing XAS forms or existing blueprints or designs obsolete. Right? This is designed, and the reason why it's taken so long to deliver this, it's designed to be backwards compatible and to consume as much of your existing relationships, your existing forms as possible. But what you're going to find is there's a much better way to do it, and hopefully this will be it. So let's switch over. Can you just confirm you see my desktop here? Refreshing.
Okay, Tom, looks like I'm not able to chat to everybody. So if you want to copy and paste what I just dropped to the organizers and panelists to the group, that would be cool.
Yep, I'll do that. I'll tweet it, and it'll be in the show notes.
Awesome,
and
thanks,
Tom,
sir.
Tom and Cody, can you see my desktop right now?
Yep.
I can see your VRA.
All right, cool. So here's a VRA. Don't be fooled by this URL. FYI, if you're going to deploy a solution with plans on upgrading it as new versions come out, don't name the URL after the version. This is a lab environment. It's a throwaway environment, so that's why you see this. But anyways, this is VRA 7.4. And what I'm going to do is show you. We'll go down to just some IaaS catalog. here's an automating IT app that I created. It's just it's a two-tier application. And with the basics, first of all, I've got my GIF, Peter Griffin there. But with the basics, this is the boring UI, right? And I call this boring, this is .NET. It's not a secret, right? Anything you see in here that is IaaS specific, I don't know why this is blacked out, is typically being brought in through an iframe from the .NET Core IaaS engine that is part of VRA. So we won't go into the architecture of VRA, but this is one of our challenges, right? This is ugly. There's not a whole lot we can do here. So then we go and we create a form in XaaS and we pretty this up a little bit, but even that is still quite limited. So what I want to do is change the way my consumers are going to interface with this application. So first of all, there's not a whole lot of help here. I don't really know what I'm asking and why do I have description and a reason, right? What is required? By the way, we no longer require those, which is great. We used to force you to do both of those early on. I've got properties because I have visibility into that, but if I had property dictionary definitions, if I had custom properties, you'll just see a whole list, a vertical list of inputs and things that the user is required to put in there, right? And we can do a lot with property dictionary. We can do a lot with XaaS, but this is really more about just simplifying the whole thing. If I go to web tier,
a good shout out on that real quick. You know, Chip Zoller, I don't know if you saw his post. He did a great post on how to build these really dynamic menus in the existing form, right? So like people have taken this and done really cool things with it, but it's still very restrictive.
Yeah. Are you calling Chip out because he just joined the vBrownBag and he's tweeting about us? Thanks, Chip.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really cool post.
Yeah, Chip, if you want to get that link in the show notes, just put it on Twitter and tag vBrownBag, and I'll get that in there.
Yeah. So, if we look at some of the basics here, I've got a web tier, some basic inputs, database tier. There's not a whole lot of excitement happening around here. So again, I want to customize this. So let's go ahead and do that. One of the other requirements I wanted to do is, for example, if I'm a manager and I am creating a new desktop, we see a lot of desktops in VRA, or if I'm creating a new machine or a dev workstation or something like that, a very common use case is I want to add a user, or I want to order this on behalf of somebody. Once they take ownership, I want them to have local admin rights, or this is onboarding and I want to create a new AD account in my lab domain or something like that, right? We see that all the time. The lab domain AD accounts is something that is very easily accomplished through XaaS. In fact, I can come in to my catalog. I'm going to show you. I've got an XaaS catalog here, data center services, and I've got, for example, I had to create an AD user. I've got create an AD machine. So if I'm provisioning an AD machine or a Linux machine and I want an AD object created for that, or in some examples, like my old environment, you had to create the AD object before that machine was able to join the domain. So I had the OU placement and all that stuff done. Those are common use cases, and try to incorporate that into the form often resulted in workflows and extensibility and a lot of other stuff. And you could do the AD integration, which is now available in VRA as well. But when that happens is just another silly reason to do a very overly complex workaround. So actually, I'm going to target that use case now that we talk about it. So let's go into the design. And by the way, as soon as you upgrade to 7.4, all of your blueprints become custom form ready. So here's my my automating IT form or blueprint. And as you can see, we've got this new option for custom form. I could edit, activate, which is deactivated by default. So let's go ahead and create or open up that that UI. And so I've got that web tier. I'm sorry, I forget what it's called, the CBP. I've got my web tier. I've got my database tier. One thing I also want to make sure to point out is anything. Well, first of all, the custom form is dependent on the completed blueprint, meaning not really dependent, but everything you drag and drop and use in the blueprint becomes an artifact available in the custom form. So you want to complete the custom form first. So here I have a working machine. I've got a web tier with min and max. I've got a database tier. Of course, I can drag and drop software components. I could bring over a network. I can do all kinds of things. Anything I bring into here becomes forms accessible. But we're going to keep this very basic. It'll drop onto a default network and have a default security group and such for NSX, call out there. But also I've got all my typical properties. Custom forms does support profiles. So if I'm using size or image profiles, those could also be attributes available on a form. And if you're not familiar with those are, we can, we could probably address that on Twitter. But forms profiles are very helpful in doing things like t-shirt sizing and image mapping and such. All right, so there's my design. I did mention that I wanted to bring over that XAS add machine to computer. So I'm going to go over here to XAS, and I already have that XAS form created. And it is create an AD machine object. So I'm just going to drag that right over here. And let's just say this is designed specifically for my web tier. So I want to make sure that at provisioning time, that the web tier doesn't get provisioned until that AD object is created. So I'm going to create this relationship. Now this is a boring ID, but it's fine. We don't really care about that. And I could look at the inputs of this object. I've already masked some of it in XAS. So again, as it is in XAS, I'm going to drag it and drop it onto this canvas. So the default domain is management.local, which is our silly domain name, and then our object name is the computer name. So at this point, this can probably get a little more involved because I want the object name to be the name that VRA chooses for my web tier. So in hindsight, this is probably not a perfect use case unless I go in here and create a binding, which you can absolutely do. So there's my my topology. I'm going to go ahead and save this, which is required before you could edit the custom form. So directly from the CBP, I can create edit custom form, and I see that come up. I've already have some of the beginnings here of a form. So what I've already done, so we start off with this general tab. General tab is general. So the form, when you go and request a new machine, the form has a general section which applies to the deployment. And those are going to be, number of deployment and maybe a description or anything else that affects the entire deployment. So I could do custom properties there, property dictionary, etc. But by default, we do expose a couple of things like number of deployments and such. So I'm going to bring over a number of deployments. This is a form field that is a default form field. And I've also added this text. So one of the things I want to do is actually walk through the user through the tiers and provide in-context help, not just at the field level, but also basically built-in documentation. Here's what you're doing here. Follow these steps. I could make this URL hot by adding a CSS. I'm going to get into that, or Cody's going to get into that in a second. And what I did to bring that in is use what's called a generic element, but back to that in a moment. So my blueprint elements are all the properties and components that are already dragged and dropped onto my canvas. So I've got create an AD object. That is my XAS machine. I've got my database tier, and I've got my web tier. Okay.
And something to call out. Something to call out real quick, like it's a very big thing to mention that a lot of this stuff typically is things that you would see in the request form, and it's a lot of times things that the user might not even interact with, right? Some of those things might just be components that take dynamic inputs in, but aren't things that the user fills out. But from a user experience perspective, on the traditional, catalog items, blueprint requests, they're going to see those objects on that left-hand panel. We're able now, using Custom Forms Designer without using XAS, to be able to really choose what the user sees. That goes back to what Jad was showing around the reason for request and the other box that I'm always forgetting. Those two boxes that used to be mandatory but aren't now. We don't have to show those if we don't want to. Yeah. There we go, description. We don't have to show those now, and that applies to any number of properties that we might hide in the background, we might not want to expose to the user. Everything on the left is things that you would typically see within that form, but because of how Custom Forms Designer works, we're able to kind of hide that stuff from the end user. It creates a better user experience, in my opinion.
Agreed, totally. And then the other thing is just being able to build relationships. So one of the pieces of feedback I always get is, hey, we've got 3 tiers, and then we go through configuring, but however I configure the first tier, I want all the other ones to just automatically be configured that way. But instead, I got to go in there and hit every single object and modify CPU, memory, storage, etc. I just want them to be consistent. Maybe I want them to be consistent based on the lifecycle stage. So for example, actually I'll do that right now. For example, I've got my general tab. I know I need inputs for web and database per the form. I've got required inputs, the min-max of CPU, min-max of memory and storage. If I've got any other objects I want to define, I want those as well. But so I have to come in here and start bringing in some of these machines. And instead of walking, or instead of having all of this in a single form or that tiered form that you saw, the boring one, I want to actually bring all of these into separate tabs. So I've got this new tab. I'm going to call this, web tier details, for example. And then visibility, I can just say always visible. We'll get back to that in a second. And then here I'm going to say DB tier details, and visibility will say yes. All right, so now I've got my web tier details, database tier details, and my general tab. For my web tier details, I'm going to just take some of the basics here. So I've got CPUs. We will say number of instances, because I know I have a 1 min, 5 max instances. We definitely want to bring over some memory, and you can see all the different properties and attributes that I have ability to then come in here and manipulate. The cool thing is any one selection or object or subselection or dropdown or whatever you do can manipulate another field, and I'm going to show you that as well. So here we've got CPU, storage, memory. Cody, I'm going to go back 5 more minutes and then hand it off to your use case. So instances, for example, I know in my form I've created a min-max value, and I'm going to just say here in my custom help, I'm going to create a signpost that says select the number of instances, just whatever. Okay, and so now I have this signpost. Now to do that today is a pain in the ass, and I'll just say that, and it's a reason why a lot of you can go into XAS and do some of that, or use some custom properties. But this is a pretty sweet little helper, right? So you can come in here and select that, and you can see what it can and can't do. So I've got instances, CPUs, memory, storage. Let me go back to database tier. I'm going to do the same thing in database. So I've got, I don't need instances because I know that that's only one. So that's, I should spell this right. Come on, Cody.
The equal didn't help there.
Yeah. So the database tier, I'm not going to do instances because we know that that is a default of 1 and a maximum of 1, and then storage. But again, any one of these can be brought over. Now here's a pretty cool thing. So that's database, that's web. So in my database tier, I want to actually come down to my generic elements. I want a nice pretty icon of whatever Cody. The database tier is. Cody, a pretty icon of Cody. So I'm going to click this image, and then we can actually come in here, and the value of this image can be a URL. So what I typically do is, first of all, I create a bunch of icons in PNG. I make sure they're all the same exact size, because size matters here. If you don't use a CSS, it'll bring its full size into the graphic. Now you can bring in any image and then use a CSS, which is available to import, and that could manipulate everything from alignment to fonts to links to images and sizes. So that's an FYI there. But anyways, you'd create you'd add the URL here. It could even be a URL to an image that you found on Google, right? It can pull it directly from external. But I like to put them all in a folder or inside of inside the appliance itself, and just refer to it which makes it nice and easy. So for the web tier, I'm going to do the same thing. I don't have an image URL, but I just want it to be complete here. And I've got some serious latency delays going on. Well, what's going on here? All right, so we've got this ghost. There we go. Anyway, so from the general tab now, I also want to be able to walk the users through pre-configure the settings based on a user's config. So in the general tab, I'm going to give me a dumb dropdown from a generic element. In this dropdown, I can create. Let me save this. Something's going on. Give me 1 second. Are you guys seeing my screen? I'm getting.
Yeah, there's a little bit of lag going on.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. Hotel network. All right. So from the general tab, I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to create that drop down, and this drop down is going to provide a couple of different things. So first of all, the values. I want to make. I want to use a value option drop down of. So here you can see value label. So I'm going to say, for example, prod, and dev, right? Make it nice and easy. Save that, and now I have value options for my dropdown. So when I hit the dropdown, I can see, or at request time, I'll see test or dev and prod. Now, based on the selection there, I want to pre-configure my web and database tiers. Now, this is where really cool things happen. So for instances, if in general I create dev, I want the instances to automatically be set to 1, right? So if I go here and I say default value of 1, I could actually make that a conditional value. And I can say if, so set value to 1, if, and you can see that drop down, which I generically called drop down, equals dev.
And it's important to call all of this in VRO would be mostly code and weird bindings that aren't entirely intuitive out of the box, right? So like the ease of building these expressions here is pretty clear, but in VRO, it's a very different beast. There is a fair amount of work to get this similar type of relationship building to function and then present back via an XAS form.
Yep. So if you can see that here, I've just added expressions, and I said if that dropdown, which I should go back and rename to stage, but if that dropdown is set to dev, set the value of this field to 1. Now let's go into CPU. We're going to do the same thing. So if I have a value of, or set this to 2, if I have a drop-down value of dev, right? And then set this value to 4 if I have a drop-down value. And then these are equals, right? I'm sorry, these are defaults. These aren't enforced unless you make them enforced, and you can do that as well. So here's prod. So just like that, I can go and do the same thing for the database tier. So by selecting a dumb dropdown, I'm manipulating the fields in every other tab in the environment. The other thing I want to do is that web tier. That add user, add the computer account to AD. That's only existing in the web tier. So I'm going to come down here to the XAS, and I see all the different properties that are available in that XAS form, and I'm going to drop this down by doing this. So checkbox, and this checkbox is going to say create AD account, ? Right? And that's just a yes, no, tick box, binary. And then I'm going to come in here to create an AD machine object, and I'm going to say object name and domain. Group we'll just say is default. So object name is the machine name, and I can create a custom help for that. But I'm going to say visibility is a conditional value, set value to yes if, now I have that create AD account equals yes. So you see what I just did there? So if I check this box in my form, now only then am I going to bring in object name and domain. So I'm going to do the same thing for appearance, just so I could demo this to you. Visibility is conditional if create AD account equals yes. And then, of course, if I want to be able to uncheck this and see those hidden, I would create another expression to do the opposite. But just for the sake of getting through this piece, I'll show you that. So now, when I check this box, object name and domain will show up.
Come in, sorry to interrupt, but
yep.
Graham has asked if we can do multiple conditions, say an and or not in the same condition phase, or if it all has to be the same.
So multiple conditions in the I believe, if I understand you correctly, yes, you can. So if I have object name, and I can create a conditional value of, well, no, so you're going to say yes, and you create another expression to change the value if there's a different point. So it's not an and. Now you can do, I mean, you can add constraints if that's probably what you're talking about, or we can just go ahead and have this conversation on Twitter.
Yeah, we can take it over to Twitter. I just want to make sure that you could do more than one condition, not just a single one. Yeah.
It gets a little bit deeper in, and we'll talk about a little bit more next week in the advanced session. Like if you wanted to do like an external binding, so you can still call like a VRO, a VRO action, and then you have all the options that JavaScript provides, right? So you can get really granular and do these multi-stage, if then, what if statements, and have it actually feed that value back in as an external source instead of being directly within the forms designer. And I see that being where people start doing the real advanced stuff, taking multiple fields, feeding them in, and returning a value.
Yep. Yeah, so we can bring those in, and next week we're going to dive a lot deeper into that, including external validations. So here we can do bind fields, external sources, and conditional values at for any one of these objects. All right, so just to give Cody a chance to come in here and do his thing. Anyways, the generic elements are, there's a lot you can do here. And again, we can create and manipulate any form entry based on any other form entry. One of my favorites here, who loves the fact that in VRA you can increment by 2 megs memory? If you have minimum 1024, maximum of 8196, why can't I select 8192? It's absurd. Now we could use t-shirt sizing with image profiles that are introduced in 7.3, or I can come in here in my form, and in my form, I can create a value step of 1024. How awesome is that? So just by doing that, so I've got my default value and I've got my value step, and of course I can create a condition here saying if this is dev, make it something smaller. That's still dependent on the blueprint, by the way. So your mins and max are enforced. But if I hit up arrow at request time, it's going to increment by 1 meg increments. Now that's genius, right? We can do that in CPU and everything. So anyways, final step here, I would want to go in here and finish all this up. I could bring in a CSS. Now that I've done all this great work, I want to export this form. I'm going to use it in other, forms as well and modify them as needed. I want to activate this form to make it available. And let's go ahead and save that. And as soon as that form is activated, I'm going to go back to my catalog and go back to my automating IT, and that form becomes immediately available. So this is all in clarity. Here I would have CSS, I would have all kinds of, I can change my fonts, make these links hot links with CSS. I've got this dropdown which I would name stage, and in that dropdown I have prod and dev based on this setting. So if I go into dev, my web tier is automatically pre-configured the way I asked it to be. And if I say create an AD account, my AD account fields show up. right? And we can do this across any number of tabs or objects from within a single form. But as you can see here, it is way prettier, way more functional, and a lot easier to consume external data, external features, and create conditions and rules, and just make this a whole lot more friendly for consumption, and with images and all that good stuff. So that's my very high level intro. I'm going to hand it over to Cody, and he's going to walk you through another use case.
Just waiting for the ball to transfer. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is more kind of a staging of next week's conversation, and a little bit of kind of a preview of where we're going to get to next week as far as diving deeper into some of the more kind of advanced use cases for how to square peg round hole this into fun things. Did you kick me the ball, Jed?
Oh, do I give you change presenter?
I think I can do it.
Yeah, I think I have to.
I got it. There you go.
All right. You see my appliance?
Yep.
There you go. Yep.
Your appliance
All
looks
right.
good.
Yay. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is more around kind of art of the possible and thinking about where we're going to take this next week. I think the conditional stuff is really intriguing, and it does answer a lot of really unique use cases, because a lot of what I think VRA is really good at is abstracting some of the more confusing decisions from end users, right? We're able to take these fields and throw content in them and do if-then statements that translate to things in the background, right? There are things that we don't want our users to necessarily be able to choose at times. For example, if we want to, if a person has a business requirement around a deployment that means it's a tier 1 deployment, and they have a policy internally that says all tier 1 deployments are protected by SRM, right? They're all part of a disaster recovery plan. We can build those type of decisions into this form, hide the techie stuff on the background, have it be dynamically filled in but still hidden from the end user, and allow it to provision. So similar to Jad, I just have a basic CentOS blueprint, obviously an old style form. We go in, you can see I have some fields here that tie into to some custom host naming. And something I want to highlight really at the form is that when I approach this from what the self-service user would see, I'm automatically not happy, right? The megabytes thing drives me crazy. Like the idea that I can, when I did this as a customer, I would get calls from project managers who say, how many megabytes do I need to pick for my server? Like, can I do 2,500? Am I allowed to do that? Right? And it gets it's a very backwards thing to have it still be referenced as megabytes. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily want end users always to be able to have to ask about. So again, looking at this form, it's very old, not so exciting. We pop in, similar to Jad, go into design, edit that form. We can start to manipulate this in ways we want. So I have this advanced host naming. You can see this was an area that I had started to play with a custom form in, and I hadn't deleted all of the stuff out yet. So typically this would have been a blank form like Jad's was when he came in, but I'd already started to fill things in. Think about this use case. If you wanted host naming to typically be a automatic thing, right? It was automatically configured with a host name based on the machine was requested, but you had advanced users who you wanted to be able to expose additional options to. Maybe you want them to be able to choose if a tier 1 system is disaster recovery protected. A cool use case that I built up in this demo was throwing a password field on, right? So if you see that I've just set this up as this display type of password, had it visible to not read only, so a person can enter text in there. There's a little help menu, enter password to show host naming options. We have all of this stuff actually blank and not filled in, but we can actually go in and set requirements around this password. So I have these set up to only show if the password equals out to something. I can't remember what I have it at, so we'll do just a simple password. Now if I go in and activate that form, we can see all of those fields show up. So it gets this, there's a cool concept there around, you could definitely have it be very dynamic and fill in all of these details in the background based on options that were picked, right? Based on if somebody picked small, medium, or large. But then we can also expose the ability for them to expand this and hit those values through the conditional values of a password. So that's one very simple example. Another one that I think about is application installations, right? We can take a custom property, bind that into a software deployment, and choose if the application runs. So if we had another box as an example, going back into the form, say we had this set up as kind of a universal blueprint for a bunch of different applications that we wanted to deploy. We could have a drop down in here, and then within that drop down, we have it be things like have that set, and then take those values and have it pipe into a scriptable task or not scriptable task, I'm sorry, into an actual software component script task that looks at the value that's returned here and runs an installation script based on that. So we start getting in this place where we're taking some of these values that are inside custom forms and piping them into other components within vRealize automation. And this was stuff that was possible before in the old form, but it was very rigid in the way that you could consume it and the way that you could present it back. You can see that we can get very creative in how we display this. We can also start to play with CSS around it. So this is how the form looks now. You can see all of these field IDs, which are different between every component within the platform. I have a simple CSS over here. Let's see if I can share this out. 1 second. Where is it? There we go. We can go in and start playing with different CSS components. These are from a previous deployment that I had done, or previous configuration, so those field values are kind of no longer valid. But if we took this, so I had a text field in there before. Let's bring out a text field for the sake of demonstration. Make this read only so that they just see some text here. And hide that label so that they don't see it, say this text field off to the side. Now we're going to grab this value right here. And this value corresponds to that object. So from the CSS perspective, that value is that field within the actual HTML constructs of this form. Now, if we pop back into code, we can replace that value there. Now, this is not played with a lot. This is just some very basic CSS. It's probably going to be more ugly than how it is right now. I'll kill this out because I don't have any image in there now. But we're going to dive more into the CSS stuff next week. So we'll go to test. What did I mess up in the CSS? Oh, have I not been sharing my VRA this whole time?
No, but I still see your CSS.
Oh, weird. Okay, I had switched over to my VRA, but for some reason it didn't.
See, if you were brave like me, you would share your whole desktop and just deal with embarrassing texts that come in.
I'm scared. All right. Fixing that CSS on the other screen real quick. Demo fail. Not sure why it's not showing up there.
See, if you had front page.
If I had front page, man. I'm wondering if it's because I blanked out the label there. Visibility is, read only is. Values. And yet the CSS didn't pick up for some reason. So we'll dive into that more next week as to why that CSS didn't actually render there. But you get the point. We're able to take the CSS, grab this field value, fill it in, and have it actually be a better looking form than it is now.
Hey, Cody, did you show the generate form? Is that how you got here?
I did not show that, actually.
Yeah, I skipped that.
Yeah, good call. So a common question when we first released the custom form designer was, these are really cool forms, but getting started with them can be a pretty laborious task. Jad and I are doing some very basic blueprints and very basic catalog items, so there's not a ton. But when somebody has 6 machines and it's a very complex build, it can be very laborious to build an actual custom form around that. So we do actually have a feature in here. So if I go in and grab just regular Ubuntu server, I hit the edit form, you see it's blank right now. We can actually do a generate form. And this is going to populate it very similar to how it would look from a standard catalog item, but in custom forms designer styling. So it's going to be much prettier, but it's going to have a ton of content in here that typically people wouldn't want to see. And if we tried to publish it out this way, first off, it wouldn't work because there are components in here that are missing issues. For example, some of these tables need to have actual values in them in order to be published. So if we went in just to show off the concept, if we kill a few of these that are going to be problems, that's the only one, I think. Surprised that one's not throwing an error around it. Go ahead and save and finish, and then hit my, and there. Oops, I don't think I activated it. Yeah. Activate. You have all of those content that are typically custom properties on the back end. Now, it's not going to be, this isn't how you would want to present it to the end user, but you can see where it'd be very easy for you to go in and say, okay, cool, this is how I want it to look, or this has the content that I need in order for this to be functional. Let's go in and start ripping out some of the things we don't need to present back to the end user. For example, if we go in, we obviously don't need to send them the lifecycle properties, custom properties that allow you to pass those props into workflows, so we can delete those out right out of the gate. We don't really care necessarily about OS architecture because we know we're cloning off of the template anyways. I have some of my Sob Labs custom properties because those are bound to my workflow anyways, so I can delete those out. Now that's not deleting the property entirely from the actual blueprint, it's just deleting it from being visible to the end user. We don't really care about the proxy, we don't care about authentication being needed. Right, so we can start to go through and clear all of these out and only really show, kind of what we talked about before, only show the properties or the actual menu options that the end user might actually care about. So again, clearing these out. A big table that we don't actually need there anymore. Version, just for grins, if I save, finish, and go to catalog, you see a lot of that stuff now is gone and not present. We can also start to get more creative around how these are positioned, right? Because we have a ton of white space over here to the side. So we could go in and start to actually rearrange that form. Changing alignment. There we go.
And of course, the CSS can justify in any way that CSS calls out, change the colors, fonts, etc.
Correct, because essentially you have full access to this area, right? So anything that you do from a CSS perspective is going to be governed by this space and essentially this frame that exists, or this angular control ultimately in the back end. Again, if I save, finish, it's going to look horribly ugly because of how I rearranged that, but it'll serve the purpose. So yeah, see, we're able to consume a ton of that space. Now we could have conditional pictures pop up, right? If somebody wanted to do 5 CPUs, we could have a picture of a sad face pop up. It'd be very easy to build this form out to have a lot of that dynamic content that looks really good, and then style the whole thing with CSS. Another cool example is something we've shown internally in examples around the Wavefront proxy, right? We're doing a lot of stuff with Wavefront now internally, and it's a real use case where somebody's deploying a web blueprint for, Apache or Nginx or something like that. And they want to check a box, have a box check to deploy the Wavefront proxy. It'd be easy to have that checkbox, hit the checkbox, a picture of Wavefront pops up, and then the configuration items below for your actual Wavefront instance. I do that with Log Insight in a bunch of my blueprints, where I'll have an input field for my Log Insight server that I want to use, because I'm usually testing multiple versions. So I can have it set up to have that pop up if I check the box to use Log Insight, so it's not being used on every single deployment. So next week, we're going to dive more into how to have this stuff pull more values from vRealize Orchestrator, right? So actually have these values feed in, or have some of these fields feed in and kick a value back out. I see that as an example for conquering the megabyte issue, right? If I didn't want this to be megabytes, if I wanted it to be a gigabytes field, but then have an action do the translation on the back end, that's totally an easy thing that would be a great use case to solve for end users, right? So an end user comes in and says, I just want 4 gigs of memory. And then that action takes that 4 input, multiplies it times 1024, and sets the custom property 4 megabytes to be that size, right? That's an example of some of the stuff we're going to cover next week. And we are up on 6:30, so that went quick. Is there any questions popping up, Tom? Well, more like 6:30 for me.
Yes, Al has a question. The background color can be modified. Just curious, but I believe Jad may have already answered that question.
Yeah, so
actually,
in this CSS,
can it be modified?
I haven't tried it in CSS, but I believe we will honor all the code in the CSS. So that'd be a good thing to walk through.
I know for fields. So for fields, yes, because that CSS block that I had when I tested it on a different form earlier today, that field would receive that update. So just going back in real quick to this. If I had a text field that I brought out, or text area, right? So this is an object right here. If I define this in this text area as CSS and do a background color on it, it will honor that.
So I would like to explore that. And so we don't have the object, the field ID for the form itself readily available, but it'd be interesting. Let's try to figure that out or prove that out between now and next week. And on that note, for anybody on the call or watches this recording, if you have specific things you'd like to see in the advanced use case session next week, bring that to Twitter, and we'd love some ideas. Instead of coming in with a canned set of capabilities, we'd love some ideas and to focus on next week. So that would be cool. And Cody, I think what you're going to show right now is, or what you're showing right now is there's actually a great amount of documentation around custom forms in the new docs. And I know docs have always been a sore spot for us, but they've done a pretty awesome job in highlighting some of these new capabilities. So definitely check out the docs.
And use cases, right? Not even just how to do this. There's actual, create a custom request form with Active Directory, similar to what Jad was talking about, right? How to set up that integration. And it gets pretty deep. I mean, the VMware Docs page has gone through a pretty revolutionary change in itself. So it's pretty exciting to see, though, like how much content is actually on there, especially for custom forms, as it is an onion, right? You're able to peel this back pretty far.
Can you put that link in the chat so I can put it in the show notes so people
of course
can follow along? All right, great, thanks. And one last question that I see, but before that, a comment. Jad, your view is awesome. So you shared on Twitter the view out your door or window.
Yeah, it was hard to pay attention to Cody when I'm sitting there staring at these boats going down the channel. It's pretty sweet.
Graham asks, so with external validation and the fact that it's a .NET app, can we use PowerShell or PowerCLI for external validation?
Yep, so we'll get into external validation next week. And there's a lot we can do there. From very basic regex, which is actually available per field, but external validations can go and kick off workflows and do a bunch of really cool things. So we'll get into that. Thanks for the idea.
Awesome. It looks like that's it. If you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for next week's show, we're going to have Cody and Jad back next week. You can hit them up on Twitter. Do you want to share your Twitter handles, guys, one more time?
Yep, at Virtual Jad.
And I'm at Cody De Arkland. I don't have a cool V name because I didn't have Twitter back then.
Yeah, well, I'm at TBGRE00, so you can hit me up as well, or use hashtag vBrownBag. We'll make sure that any feedback or ideas get fed back to the guys before next week's show. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.